Right, it's rugby next here on OTB AM with Keith Wood joining us in just a moment. But last night, Tony Ward, Eddie O'Sullivan and David Wallace spoke to Joe about the Six Nations 2019 Rugby World Cup and the Heineken Champions Cup at our Heineken Rugby Club Roadshow down in Garryowen. Here's Tony talking about Ireland's World Cup draw.
We've got to deal with the Six Nations in the moment, as you rightly say, and obviously if we do well in that, that's a springboard to go forward from that again. The big problem in the World Cup, yes, Scotland in the opening game is going to be really difficult, but if we get to the quarter-final, it's not the nightmare scenario, but I can't think of much worse than either South Africa or New Zealand, no matter who we get. Obviously, we'd prefer to get South Africa, which means we need to win our pool, and then we'll play South Africa in the quarter-final. If we don't win our pool, we play New Zealand. So it's a really difficult quarter-final, no matter what way we dress it up.
You can get more of that good stuff at youtube.com/offtheball, or of course you can subscribe to all our rugby podcasts wherever you get your podcasts. Now, Keith Wood, good morning to you. How you doing?
Good morning, Chair. How are you getting on?
I'm very well. We were speculating about whether or not Joe Schmidt actually thinks that Ross Byrne isn't in the top three of his out halves at the moment, and whether or not there's a bit of just making everybody be on edge as the Six Nations starts and ahead of selection for the Rugby World Cup. What's your take on the selection?
I thought the whole selection was very, very good, very strong. The only big omission, of course, I think being Ross Byrne. And I have a huge amount of sympathy for him because he played very well. And we called the game last week against Toulouse. And I thought he was a little bit nervy for the first 15, 20 minutes. But after that, he settled into the game incredibly well with that beautiful kick to the corner. And he has been the man, the third man for him for the last period of time. So there's no reason to think that he wouldn't. But I think he knows what he can get from him. And I think he's also offering up an opportunity to somebody else in a rich vein of form just to see if you get a bit of time inside in the camp. He could have made it really easy for himself and had 4 out halves and said, look, let's not worry about it. Johnny's a bit injured and whatever. I don't know that he necessarily does that very often. I think he's quite happy to put down a marker to say, yeah, I'll take you out for a period of time, but I know exactly what you're like and you can be back in next week. And he's done that in the past too. And sometimes we get caught in a media frenzy of trying to figure out exactly how do you justify what Joe is doing. And I always think you kind of go back to a game of chess with Joe and see the whole board and see what's the rationale behind it. I think he's covering huge options, giving experience to a guy who doesn't have any at this level, getting him into a camp, and this is the opportunity to do it.
Yeah, the other thing is that the whole of the Connacht training camp this week, next week, and for the rest of the Six Nations is going to feel alive with possibility because so many of them have actually made it, and he's been true to his word. He picked out Tom Farrell before Christmas for a mention, and all of a sudden Farrell backs it up with performances, which is the key thing. Then he is actually legitimately in the squad on merit.
Well, and I think so, and I think he has. We sometimes sidestep the influence Joe Schmidt has had in the provincial game because he doesn't just look after Ireland. His energy, his drive, his vision seems to drift into the psyche of everybody else, and he's the guy at the helm for Ireland. And I don't know that we've really had that before. We haven't had it before, where you've got such an attentive coach, obsessive. I love saying to him because he doesn't like it when you say it to him, but he is. And what he wants for Irish rugby is what he wants for himself, which is for Ireland to be very successful. And for that to happen, he kind of has to have an influence further down the line. And it's great while we have him. And then it's what is it going to be like for the next guy and the guy after that? Are they still able to have that level of strategic view going forward? So, look, I think it's exciting, but very, very tough on Ross Byrne.
Yeah.
It probably is. Yeah, like when you think about the kind of array of options as well that they currently have at out half. We were discussing this with Andy Reid yesterday, and I guess when you go down through the pecking order at number 10, the idea of pitting Carty against Ross Byrne could actually be something that's quite fruitful come the World Cup time. Is he thinking worst case scenario, do you think, Keith, when he goes through the current Six Nations squad?
I think he's thinking best case scenario. I think he's looking to cover everything possible. If you go back to 2015, he was in his job for a period of time, but not a huge amount of time. We had a few injuries. We just didn't have players exposed at that level to to be able to step up with enough of experience to do so. I think it's at a point at the moment where Joey Carbery has now got a lot more than we had, and I think it puts Ireland into a strong position. Ross Byrne has got a couple of caps. You don't know what's going to happen over the next period of time, but we're not quite as shallow as we had been, and it doesn't mean that everything is perfect either, by the way. And we get overly excited by our own system and our own structures a lot of time. It still comes down, as Tony Ward said at the very start, to a pretty difficult quarter final, one way or the other. So it's there's a lot of work that has to happen between now and then.
Like, obviously that was a bit of a curveball when it comes to the overall squad yesterday. When it comes to putting forward our best 15 for the England match, do you see Schmidt doing anything kind of like the squad yesterday in terms of curveballs?
No, I don't actually. I think, and I think that in some cases is the outer reaches of the squad. When you get down into the nuts and bolts, there's a lot of players that if you pick them, none of them come across as a curveball. We have a lot of strength and depth in that sort of 30, 32 region, probably out to nearly 40 at this stage. But you wouldn't want all those guys at 38, 39, 40 to be drafted in against England. And England are really gunning for this one. They were embarrassed by it last year. Their coach is struggling because, and you've seen from all the press over the last couple of weeks, the amount of injuries that are there. The fact that English Premiership rugby doesn't seem to be flying the highest flag at the moment. This is a big opportunity for them. So this is the only game they're thinking about at the moment, which I have to say is what Ireland under Joe Schmidt have done before. So we talk about what happens in a quarterfinal in a World Cup. He doesn't. He thinks about it, but he never talks about it. He talks about what's going to happen in this first game and then what's going to happen in the game after that.
I've been banging the drum that I think Joey Carbery should start this game, irrespective of how fit or otherwise Sexton is at the moment. He has been carrying a little bit of a niggle. We haven't yet seen Carbery in a game of this magnitude. Granted, he did start the first test down under against Australia, and as Andy Dunn pointed out the other day, Ireland were leading when he came off and when Sexton came on. So it's not like Schmidt hasn't trusted him in a big game, but it would be great to see him get that full opportunity, just so we know exactly what we have when or if we need it at the World Cup.
Yeah, I'm not sure whether that's the case or not, because I know that Johnny Sexton is the more comfortable one for us in that spot. I'm a fan of Joey Carbery. I mean, I don't have any issue starting him at any stage. I've no issue in making certain that Johnny Sexton doesn't rush back for a game just because it's a big game like this. I think you have to have that level of trust. I think it could happen. I don't know that I'm banging the drum in the same fashion as you are, but I don't have any issue with that whatsoever. I think he's good enough. And I will say that I think Joe Schmidt has trusted him in big games. He's trusted him to come off the bench as a child in Chicago, and deliver. And he did do it. So, look, as I said, I've been saying it from the very start. I was delighted when he went to Munster. I like his reaction after the shock of Castres. I think he got a shock. He hadn't played those games, and that's why there is a bit of merit in your argument. The difficulty in these things are there is an element of momentum. I don't know that you lose momentum, but that's always the fear, that you don't start off on the right foot on the Six Nations and it doesn't work for you, because you just want to win every single game on its own merits. But does that mean if we pick Joey that we don't win it? I don't see that either.
No. And I'm interested in what your take is as somebody who obviously played in Six Nations and played in Six Nations in advance of World Cups. Given our recent success in the Six Nations, there must be a temptation for Schmidt to go and treat this differently from all the other Six Nations that he's ever been involved in, particularly because he knows the end is coming for him one way or another at the end of the World Cup, and see these two things not as separate competitions but as the precursor to make sure that everything is ready to go come quarter-final time, assuming we make it that far.
Yeah, I'm not entirely sure of that rationale, but what I am sure of is that in the last number of years we have blooded a lot of players and he has not taken risks. And of course he has taken risks at different times. I don't know that you need to turn the Six Nations into something secondary as to a World Cup. I don't believe that should be the mindset of any player or any coach. But I actually think the work that we've done in the last couple of years has given us an opportunity to pick different people at different times. I mean, it's anathema to me, the idea of not being picked on a 15 and being in a sub. That's changed totally. That's the way it was before. There is a recognition that you pick the best team to go out and win any game. That best team could have Joey Carbery in it because Johnny Sexton isn't fully fit, or whatever other reason or justification we want to say. I'm not as stressed with your idea as I have been in the past. I think the alternatives can still be good enough to win those matches.
Yeah, I get that. One of the things that we were talking about as well is that Ireland's style of rugby at the moment, again, stats from Andy Dunn during the week, whereas the number of rucks that we have in our game is almost twice as many as the next top tier countries. It's natural when you explained it to us, why do we hit so many rucks, why do we create so many rucks? We tend to look for contact and use that to set up a play. New Zealanders don't look for contact to set up a play, they look for contact to have an offload, and so therefore they have far fewer rucks than us. It's quite attritional. It means that players do get injured. It means your back rows get shoulders and get broken arms and get all the injuries that we've seen our back rowers have. So you do need that strength and depth. A slight evolution in the Six Nations would be interesting, maybe 30 fewer rucks, still 30 more than everybody else, but just a fewer amount of collisions that we're asking our players to get through, because in the context of a 6-7 week tournament, that will have and will eventually take its toll.
Look, every team has injuries. Actually, if we look at our squad at the present moment in time, we balance that. The style in which we play is probably a style that suits us a lot. And the offloading game does not suit us quite as much. And I would also say, be very careful what you wish for at times, because an awful lot of the offloading games lead to shoulder injuries, because when you fall with an exposed arm. So that can happen in that fact. So you just never quite know. You can't put one exactly to the other. I do think we play quite an attritional game. And you would like to look for a bit of space more often. But I think it's a management of exactly what we have and who we have. I mean, I'm not saying I'm bowing at the altar of Joe, but his past performance has shown that he is able to get the results. He has learned a lot from that World Cup in 2015. I don't think it's just us watching from afar that have bemoaned the fact that we had 5 or 6 guys down when we needed them on that big game. And I think an awful lot of that has changed quite radically since. So from what I've seen from Ireland in the last number of years, we rarely go through a seismic shift, but we do go through really good attentive changes that make Ireland a better team over a period of time. They're subtle, but they change on a little road. So I actually think we'll see changes through the Six Nations, absolutely. But I don't think we'll ever see it all happen in one fell swoop.
Yeah, because it'd be really nice to see Andrew Porter play a big game and start a big game. It'd be really nice to see Byrne start in the second row and show exactly what he can do, because over the course of a World Cup, we will need those players in key moments in big games, and this is literally our last chance, because those World Cup warm-ups are just about getting fitness and getting your eye in. There's no intensity to any of those, as we've always seen traditionally.
Yeah, I still, when I look at Porter, if I look at Tadhg Furlong, Porter and John Ryan, if we get an injury to one of those now, I'm not happy to anybody getting injured, but I'm happy with what we have that can share the load afterwards, and it's, if we suddenly get 2 or 3 of them, where are we? But that's why there was a name check in that 27 group yesterday from Joe Schmidt. There are enough of people to fit back in at the end of that. So I don't worry about that quite as much. I do worry in other positions, but the more game time they get, you see, one of the other elements, I'm trying to get over my own natural, I'm retired a long time now, right? So when we played, it was, you always want to be picked. Yes, it was about the team, of course it was, but whatever it was, be it an overly macho view in it or whatever, the team now is 30 odd. It's not 15. That's a fairly huge change within it. So if you're asking to say what happens if Andrew Porter has to start a test, well, from what he's actually done in the last period of time, I believe he'd be fine.
Yeah.
And if he gets to 50 minutes, fantastic. You have John Ryan to do it, and vice versa. And you keep seeing an awful lot of the selection at the present moment in time. There's been a drift away from. It is important who starts, but there's a drift away from the first starter. There is a really big drive towards who's the guy with the discipline for the last 30 minutes to close out the game. That has been some of the change that we've seen since 2015.
Keith, I did want to get your take on Munster Champions Cup against Exeter in the last round of the pool matches this weekend. What's your take been on them the last couple of weeks? There has been some suggestions, some comparisons even between this team and the 2008 team. Are we getting ahead of ourselves a little bit?
Absolutely. We have the great capacity of losing the run of ourselves as Irish people. When somebody kicks one goal kick, he's a world-class goal kicker. But Munster played very well. I thought Gloucester were poor last week, but it detracted nothing from Munster and the manner in which they played. I thought it was hard, aggressive, not as well disciplined as they would like. There's a lot to work on for that. They gave double-digit penalties, which they hate. I thought Joey Carbery was fantastic. All I want to see at the present moment in time is Chris Farrell get a run of games at centre. I want to see him play. He's just different. And when we're looking at things for Ireland or for Munster, different is great. But he gets over the gain line. He is a bit of a bully with the ball in hand, which is a great thing to have. He hasn't even shown some of the subtlety of which he's incredibly capable of. So Munster looked like a better balanced team when he plays in it. So I just wanted to see him play for a while. And I just thought Joey was excellent. And I also thought Conor Murray had gone back to a much higher level. He was out for a long time with a bad injury, and it's taken him a bit of time to get back into it. But he showed last weekend, you know what, he's fully back up. And Munster just did a better structure. But then you go to this weekend, and it's going to be bloody freezing Thomond Park, and Exeter were, have been so up and down this year for a team that is the most consistent team. And they really struggled for 3 or 4 weeks. They got back to their right winning ways with Noel playing 15. Suddenly they were, they'd mixed it up a bit more than they had done. They'd gone under pressure, they'd gone very conservative, what a lot of teams do. They expanded that last weekend, and they looked an awful lot better for it. So they are a team that could do Munster damage in Thomond Park.
Yeah, it's going to be a proper end of season humdinger and lots on the line for that one. I did want to get your thoughts on how the England squad is going to be named ahead of the game against Ireland. They have some injury worries, but even when you kind of take into account the injury worries they have, I'm looking at a list of available backs for them. Mike Brown is pushing hard for a recall. It says Elliot Daly, Jack Nowell, Johnny May, Chris Ashton, Henry Slade, Ben Teo, Manu Tuilagi and Alex Lazowski are the backs that they have just for the back three and centres. That's not bad.
Now, England are rarely, if ever, bad. And one of the things about them is, and I'd often go between the Irish and the English psyche, we're getting to a level where we can deal with confidence fairly well. And it's by proving it for every second of the game afterwards. England have an inherent confidence, arrogance, we would always say when we're trying to point fingers at them or slag them off. But it's an arrogance that I often think it makes them have a couple of hiccups along the line, but when things aren't going their way, it pushes them up a further level than other teams. They have an ability they still expect to win, irrespective of what's happening. And they are hurt by what happened last year, and they're gunning for us. So I do think they've injuries. I do think they've players back. Manu Tuilagi is of colossal importance to England, only because, he's a fine player and he's very powerful and he's a really good ball carrier. He gets over the gain line. He knows where the line is. But also there's an expectation that other players play incredibly well around him and off him. And they've missed him for a while. So they've missed him and they've missed Billy Vunipola. And those players do an awful lot for them. And it just makes them, even just for the want of 2 or 3 players, England can suddenly get back to a level of confidence. Might take other countries a period of time. They don't have to bypass. They bypass all of that. They just go straight into full confidence mode.
Yeah, that arrogance must be fairly frustrating to come up against when they're in their pomp.
Yeah, thanks for reminding me of that, and I did for a lot of it in their pomp, and it's funny because it's an arrogance on, it's kind of like a sense of arrogance, and a lot of the players aren't arrogant. It's an unusual element. So for a lot of those guys, I think we only beat England once in my time. A lot of that has changed now, and it's very hard to be arrogant when you've been beaten a lot.
Yeah, I'm sure. Go on.
Well, there is still some sort of, I guess it goes back to your previous answer, Keith. There is kind of a sense that they should be arrogant, that if they can find that arrogance again, it's going to be hugely positive for the outcome of this team. And maybe it is a result against Ireland that they need. It does seem, kind of going back to what you said, that it is just one spark is all this English team needs to kind of get back to that level of superiority, and that complex feeds into further success, you'd imagine.
Well, I think if I go back, they won the World Cup in 2003. In 2007, they were in absolute shambles and got to the final. You know, we haven't got past the quarterfinal. So there are elements of this. Look at the draw. There's a whole variety of different things, but they still expect to go and win all the time. That hasn't necessarily been a very comfortable Irish psyche. Now we're trying to get to it, but we're trying to get to it without losing the run of ourselves. You know, that's we win a game in Gloucester. And because Gloucester sits into the Munster history annals for all those kind of mad wins and the miracle match, that because of that game, we are now automatically at the level where we've been with the teams that won in 06 or 08. So it's not the same.
Good stuff, Keith. Thanks for joining us this morning. Cheers.
Cheers, gents.
It's Keith Wood with us this morning, giving us some perspective ahead of Ireland against England.